Welcome back, folks. I've just begun the disassembly of the SL125 engine, and it was about as bad as I expected. Literally just pulled the head off the cylinder. You can see there's a bunch of debris in there right now on the top of the piston. Here's the cylinder head. See the valves are all rusty. I had to drive those down in order to take the tension off the cam. Here's the cam right here. And that fought me every inch of the way getting that out, even though it's not in bad shape. I did end up putting a vice grip on this and turning it enough that I could pull it out after taking the tension off the valves. So I marred that up a little bit, but I think I can dress that with a good file. That's not a wear surface right there. I mean, there's nothing that really fits against that. So the cam's okay, it's not great. So the cam fought me, and believe it or not, this carburetor block, which fits on here, like that little sucker fought me every inch of the way. It took me probably at least 30 minutes, if not 45 minutes, to get that off intact, because I did not want to damage that, and it's no longer available. So I'm sure I could find it out on eBay or something, but that took a lot of effort to get off, and getting the cam out, it took a lot of effort as well. Someone had been in here before, as I alluded to. The cam chain tensioner, that's what this is right here, was already loose. I did not loosen that. No, I would have normally had to. The cam chain, let me turn the engine around for you. The cam chain is down in the lower end. I don't know if you can see that or not. It was looped up over the cam in the top, and I just let it drop. And this crank is still locked up. So the cam chain is down in here. See if I can give you a little better perspective of that. Cam chain is down in here, and you can see here this is part of the tensioner. That's how it was when I opened this cover up like that. So it's about as I had expected, or at least as bad as I'd expected. Going to have a complete valve job. Probably new valves, seals, guides. They're available. I don't know if guides are available for this motor. Check the cylinder. I'll pull the cylinder next and see what's going on in there, and we'll get into the lower end, and I'll bring you back at various stages as I proceed with the breakdown. Well, it's actually a couple of days later, and I spent the last 2 days trying to finesse this engine apart. The cylinder head I have been soaking in PB Blaster, which is my penetrant of choice, and I've been spraying PB Blaster down in the top of the valves here and letting it run through. And you can see I got it soaking just in a piece of plastic. That's the top of a storage container, and just letting it run through and letting it soak. Eventually I'll come back to this and have to try to get the valves out. Most of the work's been going on trying to get the cylinder off. Well, I should clarify that. I haven't really tried to get it off. I've been loosening it over the last couple of days, and the technique I typically use on something like this is PB Blaster in the top here, because this is very solidly fixed. I think the rings are probably rusted to the iron. I think it's got a cast iron cylinder, and it was rusted together. So I soak with PB Blaster. I mean, literally, I put probably that much PB Blaster on top of the piston, and then I heat the cylinder thoroughly. I get it really hot, and then I let it cool down. And I usually do those heating and cooling cycles as many times as it takes. I probably have done half a dozen, maybe 6 on this. That is, heat it up very hot, just walk away and let it completely cool down and normalize. Come back a few hours later, heat it again, and repeat that process. Now, normally I don't care to use an open flame on engine components, but in this case I just used a propane torch, because I found with my hot air gun, because of this mass is so large, I couldn't get the cylinder as hot as I wanted to with a electric hot air gun. So I did use this judiciously, and I just heat all the way around, as I indicated, till it gets good and hot, and then let it cool. And then I use my soft mallet, you know, plastic on one side, brass on the other, and then I just start working on the cylinder gently. You don't want to damage the fins like this. After it's cooled, of course, you don't want to put your hand out when it's hot. And just whacked it with the rubber end of the mallet, and walked away, came back, repeated the process over and over and over. And through that technique, I've been able to get the cylinder loose a bit. As you can see here, I have not pulled it off yet. That is the next step today, and I'll record that for you so you can see initially me pulling or at least attempting to get the cylinder off so I can see what's going on. The other thing I had to do was order a puller for this rotor here on the end of the crank. I do have this puller that I've used on mostly 2 strokes, but this engine uses a little bit different design, and you could probably, well, you can take this right out. This is just a bolt, it goes into the end of the crank. You could probably fabricate something that will go in there, a bolt, and try to pull this or pop this off. It's a 14 by 1.5 metric thread, of course, but I'm not going to use just a bolt because I don't want to. The bolt's probably going to mushroom on the end anyway, the mild steel against the hardened crank. I don't want to damage the end of the crank, so I ordered a proper puller for it, which will probably be here in a few days. And then I'll see if I can't get this rotor off. But for now, that crank is still very locked up. I prefer to pull the rotor before I open it up. That is the engine, because it's easier, I think, to work on the crank while it's fixtured in the engine cases. But I'll have to see how my timing goes. But what we're going to do now is see if we can't go ahead and get this cylinder off. So let me reposition the camera a little bit. It is cold right now. It's early morning. I haven't heated this since yesterday because I wanted to be able to handle it. And we'll see if we can't get the cylinder off. It might take a little time to work it back and forth before I can get it off. I will very likely end up tapping down on top of the piston like this with this brass end. Never use, let me repeat that, never use a steel hammer on a piston unless you are absolutely planning on replacing the piston, because you'll damage it. You'll down it for sure. Now in this case, I'm pretty sure I'm going to replace the piston. Probably have to bore the cylinder over probably at least 2 sizes. I'm guessing it's corroded down in there, probably some pitting. So I could get away with a steel hammer, but it just goes against my sensibilities to use it. So I'm going to use this brass end. And very likely I'll end up tapping down on the piston to help bring this cylinder up. And I'm not concerned about the bearings in the lower end. If anyone out watching is saying, well, you could damage the bearings, I'm sure the bearings are going to have to be replaced anyway. And I'm not going to be hitting it that hard. I'm not going to get that aggressive with it. So let's set up and reset up, and we'll see what we can do to get this cylinder off. I'm not going to put any more PB blaster in the top. I've wiggled the cylinder a little bit, and what was in there has drained through into the bottom end. Pretty sure this lower end is full of PB blaster that's drained through. So, and I'm not going to heat it, as I think I had mentioned. So I think what I'm going to do is see if I can't just work this up here a little bit. I'm going to work it up and down as I go. I'm not going to try to just pull it off in one fell swoop here. Certainly I'm not in a rush. I can now see the bottom of the piston skirt underneath here. Since I've run out of stroke here on my hammer, I'm just going to use this big brass punch. And there we popped it off. And there we can see the piston. Obviously the bearing, the big end bearing on the lower end is frozen. Rings are collapsed, and yeah, there's some rust in that cylinder. So I'll inevitably end up having that bored probably at least the second over, if not the third. I think you can go 4 over on these, 0.5 millimeter per size, and I know the parts are pretty much all available for all the different sizes. So we got the cylinder off, got the head off. What I'm going to do next is probably work on the valves. Not sure, I got to think it through a little bit. As I indicated before, I really prefer to pull this rotor before I split the cases. So that might be a few days before I can get to that. But it probably took me all together to pull that cylinder 20 minutes, 15-20 minutes, I would say, thereabouts. But I'll bring you back a little later and we'll see where we're at. That's, I think, going to be it for this video today, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.